Hey everybody, welcome to K Whitehall. Please keep your mask on for the duration of the performance. Oh, and please take a moment to silence your cell phone. Thank you for supporting Vashon Center for the Arts, and enjoy the show.
Just wanted to remind everyone that we do need to keep our masks on during the show. And I'm so excited to welcome today to VCA Marisela Fleites. It's been a while that we've actually been trying to get this scheduled, so she's here today with us. A little bit about her. She's a Cuban-born dancer since age of 5. She's trained with masters all over from Cuba to Mexico, Spain, and in the US. She's an instructor, choreographer and director at Sabor Flamenco in partnership with Tacoma Urban Performing Arts Center, which apparently is like the only flamenco training program from here to Portland, so that's kind of cool. She's also, in addition to all that, she's the professor of Latin American Studies over at Green River College. So, but if you'd like to know more, she's going to be available after the show in the lobby, so you can totally chat and ask her questions too. But for now, let's give a warm welcome for Marisela Fleites.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. And am I on? Yes? Okay. Thank you for coming in this beautiful afternoon. It's not a good day to be here, right? I wish we were outside, right? We can dance outside or something like that, but we're here. So I am really, really thankful to have you all here. And to talk about, one of the things I'm very passionate about, which is flamenco. Before I start, I would like to really recognize and thank the Vashon Art Center because we have been persistent, right? It's been a trip to get here in that, of course, we were supposed to do this like 2 years ago, and now, of course, there was something called pandemia or pandemic or whatever you call this thing. And I also would like to particularly recognize Chrissy Baker, who has been so instrumental in getting this whole thing organized. And although they can't be here today, I want to recognize Ron and Mary Thomas, who are part of the Vashon family. And they are the ones who recommended to the Vashon Art Center that we do this today. So we are here thanks to them, and I am going to dedicate to them my second piece, and I'll tell you later why, that one. Okay, so I am going to do something I normally love to do, which is to talk about, educate people about flamenco. Normally when we do performances, I don't have too much time to talk. Students are constantly saying, don't talk. So today I am going to talk about flamenco and do some show and tell. So the title for this talk is Flamenco, Regional, National, and Transnational Art Form. And I am going to be asking some questions throughout the talk, not just giving information, but I'm going to try to complicate and question some of the common stereotypes or common ideas about flamenco. Because as you heard, I can't help it, but I'm an academic, so that's what we do. So the goals for today is I'm going to introduce you to some basic information about flamenco, and I know that I'm sure you all have some familiarity with flamenco, otherwise you wouldn't be here probably. But also, so I might be repeating things that you know. Just excuse me for that, but for others, I don't know what the audience knows. So I'll give some basic information about flamenco as a very complex for me, the most complex art form, but I am biased. Its history, the development. I am also going to discuss the intersection of race, gender, ethnicity, and politics in the development of flamenco, which is extremely interesting, and discuss, by doing so, the transnational nature of flamenco. So a little bit about Spain. We can't talk about flamenco without talking about Spain, obviously. And as you can see, this is an interactive map, right, that is changing because this map is talking about the period in which Spain was occupied by Muslim Arab tribes, and it was, it established what's called El Andalus, which is the origin of the word Andalusia, I guess you say that in English, I don't know. But El Andalus, right? In the year 711, the Muslims invaded from the south, invaded Spain, displacing the Goths that were settled. There were many groups, but mostly Goths were settled in the Iberian Peninsula. And that same year, right? So if you look at the biggest green, right, that's as far as they got, and then the reconquest of the peninsula from the north started almost immediately. But it lasted from the year 711 until that very famous year of 1492, which is a very complicated year. But the point I want to make is that during those centuries, right, there was a coexistence in that Al-Andalus, right, in that region that was dominated by the Moors. There was a coexistence of Muslims, Christians, and Jews, right? And it was not absolutely peaceful and without any problems, obviously, right? But it was a coexistence, and something important is that the Moors that dominated politically and economically never forced the Jews or the Christians to convert to Islam, to stop speaking their language, or to stop practicing their customs. Something that completely changed when the Catholic king and queen took over in 1492 and actually forced the Jews and the Muslims out of Spain, or they had to convert. And there are these very kind of funny stories of these massive conversions, forced conversions, right? Because imagine your family has been living there for centuries, and suddenly you are forced to convert to Christianity. And of course, as you know, there is a little thing about the Inquisition. So that's something that people don't realize today, right? Because we demonize in our current world. We demonize Muslims and Islam, right? When, of course, history teaches us otherwise, right? And so I just wanted you to be aware of that. So centuries, right, of this coexistence meant that there is this influence, right, mutual influence of all of these cultures, right? And this is really at the basis of today's culture in Spain, and particularly of flamenco. And I'll talk more about that, right? And as you know, 1492, right, the genocide of the Native Americans started with the arrival of the Spaniards in the Americas. The conquest, the colonization, of course, almost immediately African slavery started in the Americas. It existed before, but so then the culture that existed in Spain got enriched by this encounter and this interaction with the Native Americans in the Americas and with the Africans. And I'm going to try to prove to you that all of that is relevant to understand flamenco. And my point is that you can't understand flamenco if you don't understand that. Okay? So, there we go. Okay, so I'm doing something here that I tell my students not to do. Okay, my college students, which is to put a lot of words in the PowerPoint. But don't tell them I said that. Okay, so what is flamenco, right? So this is, I just decided to give you the official version, meaning this is the definition of flamenco. Flamenco in the year 2010 was recognized by the UNESCO as part of the United Nations, as part of the representative list of the intangible cultural heritage of humanity. So there is an International Flamenco Day. Flamenco is recognized as part of the humanity, as part of humanity's patrimony, right? So it's not just something that Spaniards danced, right? It's part of the heritage of the world. And so in its then official UNESCO definition, right, is defined as an artistic expression that fuses cante, dance, baile, and music. And it is the badge of identity of numerous groups, right, numerous communities, but in particular, and I'll talk more about this in a moment, is the badge of identity of the Roma or the Gypsy community in Spain, which of course, as I'll prove to you, has played a tremendous role in the development and the establishment of flamenco. Okay, so Andalusia, which is the green part there, is the birthplace of flamenco. And this is important, right? Because sometimes we stereotype Spain and we put a sign of, how do you call that, equal sign? But anyway, we put together Spain and flamenco, right? And that's not true, right? Spain is a very complex country with a lot of different ethnic groups that are part of it, that have very long, centuries-old traditions and different traditions, dance traditions. I have a friend who is also my flamenco student here in the audience, who is from Galicia, right? And the Galicians dance, and they have an incredible folkloric, very diverse folkloric group of music and instruments, right? Very related to the Celtic cultures, right? It has nothing to do with flamenco, right? So please be aware of that, right? And there are languages in Spain that are not Castilian, right? That is not just Spanish, right? So you have in Catalonia, they speak Catalan, they speak Euskera in the Basque Country, they speak Galician in Galicia, right? And there are many regional other languages, right? So be aware of the very strong diversity, both ethnic, linguistic, and in terms of music, dance, and culture in Spain. So flamenco is from Andalusia, that green part there. And particularly within Andalusia, what's called the triangle of the birth of flamenco, right, is that Jerez de la Frontera, you have there, Seville, and Cadiz. That corner, right, which is the southwesternmost corner of the Iberian Peninsula, right, is what we call the triangle of flamenco, where it was born, right? Particularly in Triana. Within Seville, there is a neighborhood that was a neighborhood of the Gypsies, and that's called, the neighborhood today is Triana. And Triana, which is on the other side of the river Guadalquivir, right? Because the Gypsies were kept as far away from the urban center as possible. Triana is really, we could say, like the birthplace of flamenco, but that is all contested, right? Now that I said that, I have to say that there are many versions of where, when, who, right? How this art form exists, right? Because, of course, in its very origins, there are very few documents that we have of the historical documents related to flamenco, because, again, it's related to the gypsies, right? A little bit about the origin of the word flamenco, right? And I would like this audience to repeat flamenco. So it's not flamingo. Please? Okay. At least the 20 people here are not going to say flamingo anymore. Yes? Okay, thank you. It's flamenco, yeah? But where does the word come from, right? So there are many, many versions. I mean, there are like 20 versions of the origin of this word, right? I'm giving you just 3 here, but there are many other versions. One is that it comes from an Arabic word, felamengus, I don't know how to pronounce it in Arabic, but which means wandering country person, right? And of course, I have to give you the citation of where I got that. Sorry. Another is that there is a type of knife that is called a flamenco, right? And it appears in a little theater piece in the 18th century called El Soldado Fanfarrón, and that's where the word appears. And people sometimes identify because it's a type of knife that many gypsies used. And so it could be that, or it could be something else. One of the most commonly accepted definitions is the third, flamenco, as a Flemish Dutch person. So in Spanish, a person from Flanders is called flamenco. And what happens is that for several centuries, Spain favored, sounds familiar, I think, favor certain types of immigrants. And they favored as manual labor, as workers, they favored immigrants from the German region, Flanders. And although they were immigrants that were not wealthy, they were preferred to the gypsies. So it seems that some gypsies started calling themselves, or were called because they were perceived as others, right? They were called flamencos. So this is another possible source of the origin of the word. The reality is we don't know for sure. Some people say maybe it's the bird, right? Because of this, typical flamenco posture, like, right? The birds that stay 1 hour like this. It could be, right? It really could be anything. But these are some of the 3 most commonly. Let's talk a little bit about the Roma people. Roma, Romani, there are several ways of spelling the word, right? And I have to say that Gitanos in Spain, I think some of you might have seen Diego Amador, who was here playing with Savannah like a month ago or so. Did anyone come to see that show? Well, Amador, that musician from Spain that was playing here in this very theater, I don't know, 20 days ago. He comes from a very notorious gypsy, the Amador gypsy family, right? So the dynasty of the Amadors. And they do not accept the word Roma, right? So therefore, I continue to call them Gitanos, right? With a capital G, right? But they obviously ethnically are part of the Romani people that originally were thought to be Egyptians, hence the word gypsy. Gypsy comes from the word Egyptian. And because the Romani people come from the northern part of India, right? And they are still, many of them, but itinerant tribes, right? So they're tribes that move from one place to another. And apparently, around the 11th century, they were fairly discriminated against, even in northern India. Is my earring making a sound? No? Okay. Let me know, because I moved too much. So they started wondering, supposedly they were expelled from northern India. Oh yeah, that's it, okay. That's off. Please remind me. And so they're wandering down, they go to Egypt, right? And it's very interesting that for many gypsies, for many Gitanos, they trace their ancestry back to the Egipcios, right? To the people from Egypt, right? In fact, Lola Flores called herself La Faraona, the great pharaoh woman. But anyway, their language, they arrive in Spain around 1425, and we know that because there is a decree by the king of Spain asking, in 1425, asking the gypsies to settle, so keeping them from moving around. And they identify a few places where they could stay, but they didn't want them to be traveling from one place to another, right? And for the most part, they were kept outside of the walls of the cities, right? But that's how we come up with this date of 1425. They probably were there before that, but that's the documentation we have, right? Romanis in Spain have a very special language, right? And that language is Caló or Sincaló, which is a mix of Romani, the original language, with Spanish, Catalan, Portuguese, right? So, and today their population is around 1 million. It has been decimated by centuries of pogroms aimed at eliminating them from Spain and from the world. We talk a lot about the Holocaust in fascist Germany, right? And we talk mostly about the Holocaust and the genocides against the Jews. But something that most people don't know is that part of that genocide was aimed at the gypsies all over, as well as against homosexuals, against mentally people with mental disorders, or they were perceived as being not normal, even if they were Aryan and Germans and whatever, right? So it was not just against the Jews, right? And the gypsies suffered. I mean, the program, Hitler's program, was to eliminate gypsies from the world, right? So in spite of that, and that's the beauty of people like, again, the Jews and Native Americans, and is in spite of the attempts to kill them, right? They're here, and we need to honor, right, their art and their incredible contributions to the world. So for instance, if you want to Google later, the Great Gypsy Roundup of 1749 was an attempt in Spain to round up all the gypsies and put them in labor camps, right? And the horror stories of that labor camp, those several labor camps, and again, the intention was to actually eliminate them if possible. So it predates, obviously, Hitler. Now, one thing I wanted to say is that, back to the gypsies, right? There's no one that questions today that the origin of flamenco is in the gypsy community. Although not everybody agrees on to what extent what we call today flamenco is identifiable to the gypsies. And for me, that's one more attempt at appropriating a culture, because nowadays everybody wants to see flamenco, right? So now it's okay to see flamenco, right? Now it's good, right? And therefore, it's for me one more attempt at culturally appropriating something that originally definitely was born out of the gypsy communities. Obviously, like everything, developed, and we'll talk about that later, right? I wanted to recommend later on, and again, you can ask me later and I'll give you all this information. This YouTube link here allows you to watch a documentary called Camelamos Naquerar. And those two words are from Caló. Camelamos Naquerar in Caló means we want to speak. And in 1975, this documentary was produced, and it's the first time in the history of Spain, 1975, that there is a documentary about the gypsies made by gypsies. And it's incredible, incredible, because it was a collaboration of all Romani gypsies, particularly one poet who at the time, a gypsy poet who at the time a Maya, of the Maya family, who at the time was also a university professor. And he created poems out of all the edicts and laws and policies and written documents that were written to suppress the gypsies. And then, in collaboration with gypsy singers and dancers, they put music to those documents. And it's just so powerful, even if you don't, because unfortunately that YouTube link is not, you want to watch a little bit? Or, yes? Okay, let me see if we can do that. It doesn't have translation. Now, how can I make this how can I make this to be heard? Maybe. Who is back there with the sound? Maybe we cannot do this. How? It's on. It's going on. But you cannot hear it or see it. See, I don't use, this is a Mac and I use PCs. So I know nothing about this thing. Okay, show me. We should have done this before. Yes, you might know, huh? So it's not my fault, is it? It's not my fault. Look at that. Do I have to end the show? No, don't do that. It's already there. No. Okay, well, that's fine.
Okay, I can play it from up top.
Huh? Can you play the sound at least, or can you play the actual video? Oh, there you go. You can do it. Okay, so Camelamos Naquerar is really an amazing thing, even if you don't understand the language. But now that you know that when you watch it, you know that what they are singing are that edict that I talked to you about from 1425 and the edicts of the Great Gypsy Roundup, right? The document that started that roundup, and they're dancing to that. If it is too complicated, we'll keep going. I mean, it's going to damage most of my talk, but that's okay. You're going to trust what I say. Does it happen, or should we keep going? Ah, okay, good. Oh, well. Tiquititín, tinquintitín.
Camelamos Naquerar es una obra que tiene como objetivo exponer una situación de injusticia determinada.
Okay, we can
Concretamente,
hear it,
la
but we
peculiar forma de
don't see
racismo que
it.
se practica en España contra los gitanos desde que finalizado el siglo XV, los reyes católicos
Do I do
firmaron
something
en
here,
Medina del Campo una pragmática...
I know technology is wonderful, but yeah, we cannot live without it, though. Well, I can show you books in the meantime. There's some good books that are coming out now. One of them is this one called Sonidos Negros on the Blackness of Flamenco, and it's really fascinating, by Maida Goldberg. And this one is my favorite of all, Sandy Holguin, and it's fairly recent, I think 2019, and it's called Flamenco Nation, and some of the things I'll talk about in terms of the relation between flamenco and the idea of nation and the use of flamenco pro and against the nation. So it's called Flamenco Nation, The Construction of Spanish National Identity, and the author is Sandy Holguin. No? Oh, yes. I'll keep my show and tell until you can do it. Ah, no. Okay. Well, that's okay. That's okay. That's fine. So just watch it. It's really good. Well, now let's see. I need to be able to go back to this, and hopefully, yes. Okay. So I just told you that the origin of flamenco is rooted in the gypsy community, right? But I also told you that for 7, almost 8 centuries, right, there is this coexistence, right, of Arabs, Jews, Christians, and then in that mix enter the gypsies, right? So definitely, and if we were to play that link there, I can prove to you that Islamic chants are absolutely part of what made flamenco, right? So if you listen to, especially, I have a wonderful one there, but you won't be able to hear it, or yes? For the other one, okay, great. So you can put it like in minute number 6. Yeah, just perfect. That right there. Yeah, right there. So this is 1975, right? So these are gypsy neighborhoods.
A todas las justicias que teniendo noticia de que andan gitanos en su partido, se reúnan todos y con la prevención necesaria de gentes, perros y armas, los cerquen, prendan o maten.
So this is
Si
the
los
great
prendieres
roundup of
a los
gypsies. That's what
gitanos y
they.
gitanas, que por algunas causas justas no mereciesen pena de muerte ni galeras, queden esclavos para toda la vida.
So if either should be killed or be enslaved for life. That's Mario Maya. I've taken classes with him. And with her as well, the one I was dancing before. He's amazing. So they're representing there the enslavement, right, the imprisonment, and that's a martinete, which I'll dance for you in a little bit. Okay, you can stop it. Okay. Okay, now if you can hit on that one, can we just play the sound of that? So if you're familiar with flamenco singing, you're going to...
إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.
Okay.
اللهم صل على.
So, you know, the monochordic Islamic chants, right, are definitely was something that enriched the traditions of the gypsies. One thing I wanted to mention before was that although nobody disagrees that the gypsies are at the base, at the origins of flamenco, there has been historically several discussions on whether they brought flamenco with them or they created flamenco in Spain, right? And most historians and ethnographers and ethnomusicologists will agree that flamenco was created in Spain, right? Obviously, as a mixture, and that's what I'm trying to prove now, right? As a mix of what the gypsies had been collecting for centuries of wandering, right? There's another amazing documentary called Lacho Drum, which, have you seen it? Oh, great. It is, I mean, I get goosebumps. It's beautiful, and it's all Romanese, and it traces, you have groups singing and dancing from northern India, Egypt, all the Balkans. There's even a woman who sings, oh my gosh, who has, you know, her number from the concentration camp inscribed on her arm. And she's singing sitting next to where that concentration camp was. It's amazing, right? And then finally makes it all the way to Spain, right? So you can see that tradition, how that, you know, like the movement of the hands, absolutely that movement comes, you know, it's part of that tradition that comes from India, right? But you can see how it develops, right, in Spain with they get there and there's this very rich wealth of Islamic, Jewish, Christian culture that they then feed from to create flamenco, right? Can you play that? Mm-hmm.
Concha mía, chicha de mi cabeza. La luna me se escureció, la mar se hizo preta. concha mía, chichek de mi cabeza. La luna me se escureció, la mar se hizo preta.
So Sephardic, Sepharad in Hebrew is the name for Spain. And so the Sephardic Jews are the Jews that lived for centuries and centuries in Spain, right? After the diaspora, the Jewish diaspora, many Jews settled in the Iberian Peninsula, and that's what we call today Sephardic Jews. Those who then were expelled, right, by the king and queen or forced to conversion, right? And those who were expelled and, had to, again, run all over the world again. Actually, there is a Sephardic community, Jewish community in Seattle. And they have kept those traditional singing, right? Those traditional chants, which is really amazing. So Sephardic Jews singing, Sephardic Jews are the Jews of Sepharad, right? So the Jews of Spain, right? And they are the communities that came from those Sephardic Jews all over the world have maintained, some of them have passed the keys to their house from the 15th century. From generations to generations, right? It's just amazing. And of course, there are also the Byzantine Gregorian chants and Spanish romanzas that were already or that developed in Spain, right, among the Christian communities that were in Spain at the time that the Muslims invaded. Do you want to play a little bit of that? So that's the Romanza Andaluza from Sarasate. So it's a kind of waltzy. Okay. And romanzas are in general like narrative ballads, right? And this is a more instrumental, very well-known romanza, but there are others with singing, right? And then finally, I want you to be exposed to this name, Mozarabic chants. And can you play that? You can read Good. So you can hear that, right? Which is also typical of Sephardic Jews and of definitely. I mean, when I hear the call to prayers, the Islamic call to prayers, it's like I'm hearing flamenco. I just want to dance. And the Mozarabs were very important. So these are the Christians that remain in Al-Andalus, right? That didn't go north to join that reconquest, right? And they were extremely important for the development of music and the development of culture in Al-Andalus, and very accepted by, again, the Muslim rulers. And another very, very important root of flamenco, and for those who know me, you know that I'm Cuban. But for the rest, I'm Cuban. So I'm part of my family comes from Spain, and that's how I got to be enamored with flamenco since I was 5, and I just turned 63, so you do the math. But one of the very, very important roots of flamenco are the Afro-Caribbean rhythms. So I cannot stress enough the impact of Africa in the world. We wouldn't be who we are without Africa in every possible way, and particularly in terms of music. In fact, many of the words, like the word tango, is an African word. So many of the words we use, right, in music actually come from the African continent. And the African percussion, the rhythms that have impacted flamenco tremendously, right? And particularly as that African culture became Afro-Caribbean, right? So there are, within the body of rhythms in flamenco, there is what we call cantes de ida y vuelta, which in Spanish, that means, it's a beautiful concept, songs that went and came back. Isn't that gorgeous? Right? Just take that for a moment, right? So that means, of course, Spaniards arrived in the Americas, they encountered the Native Americans, they then bring enslaved Africans, right? And that blend went back to Spain and transformed Spain, right? And transformed flamenco. So there are many rhythms in flamenco, and I give you some names here, like there's a flamenco rumba, there's a flamenco vidala, which comes from Argentina, from the natives of Argentina. There's a colombiana, comes from, obviously, from Colombia, from Afro-Caribbean Colombia. Guajira comes from Cuba. Milonga comes from Argentina. So habaneras from Cuba, peteneras from Mexico, right? So it's not that they came from Mexico, right? It's just that these flamenco rhythms, they don't exist like that in Latin America. They're flamenco rhythms, but that were formed in Spain because of the influence of what the Americas, particularly Afro-America, and I'm talking about America as it should be, right? North, Central, South, and Caribbean region. Because America is not the United States, you know that. I wanted to show you this instrument. This is called el cajón, right? And this is, nowadays, all flamenco groups use this. And I just realized I wore the wrong dress to play this, but so I won't do it as you should, because I should really open it, right? But you sit on it, and then you play through here, but I can't do that, so. So you play the cajón. Right? But you got the picture. This instrument is Afro-Peruvian, right? So there is a very strong Afro-Peruvian community, and our great friend who has come to sing for us here in the Seattle area, Marita, my great friend, I'm forgetting her name. Susana Vaca, I just remember. There's a reason why I tell you my age. Susana Vaca, right, is this Afro-Peruvian amazing singer, not of flamenco, just of Afro-Peruvian. She's been doing this incredible ethnographic work of collecting Afro-Peruvian music and singing. So Google her, Susana Vaca. Back to flamenco. So this instrument was developed is an Afro-Peruvian instrument that then was incorporated particularly by Paco de Lucia. So it's fairly recent. And nowadays, you don't see a flamenco group without it, but it's a fairly recent acquisition, right? And again, it comes from the African coast, the groups of Africans in Peru. So, so let's talk a little bit about flamenco. And people are always, So there are many styles of flamenco, right? So I always say that flamenco, the word flamenco, is an umbrella name that encompasses a huge array of different rhythms. And that is what makes it so unique, right? Because in most traditions, you have, the 1-2, 1-2, 1-2 rhythm, right? Or rhythms that are waltzes, right? In flamenco, you have everything, right? So there are styles, so rhythmically, for me, and in my absolute ignorance, rhythmically is the most complex art form that exists. Because there are around 59 different flamenco rhythms. Some of them are binary, 1-2, 1-2. Some of them are played in 4s, some of them in 3s, some of them in 6s, some of them in 12, some of them in 5. Today I'm going to expose you to 6, 12, and 5s, right? But within that, within what I just said, then you have tons of variation, right? So if I can play a bulería, I can do 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, as opposed to a soleá, for instance. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, right? And it's 12. It's completely different, right? So this means if you want to dance, sing, or play flamenco, you have to know a lot of rhythms, right? And understand the compás. That's how we call it, right? The compás is extremely difficult to understand. So that you get an idea of the complexity rhythmically, right? This great scholar of flamenco, Faustino Núñez, just put together just recently this map, right? These are the flamenco rhythms, right? And it's really an amazing source for us, dedicating our lives to these. I circle here what I am going to dance for you later, right? So the seguirilla with the martinete on top, Sevillanas and Alegrias, right? But you can see the complexity, right? And then within each one of these rhythms, then you have regional, you have even differences by who sings what in this town, right? So you have the Alegrias de Enrique el Cojo and the Alegrias of so-and-so, and they're different, right? Because one of the beautiful things and complex flamenco is that it allows for a lot of flexibility, right? So you get the picture, right? Now, I wrote there flamenco musical system transnational because I'm sure you don't have, because you can see, for instance, their tango, right? Tango flamenco, right? You can see that there are arrows coming from the tango americano, meaning the tango caribeño, the Caribbean tango, right? Tango is, again, an African word. It doesn't come from the tango, Argentinian tango, right? But that tango impacts the milonga argentina, the milonga vidalita, right? The villancicos, the Roma. So there is this interconnection, right? of coming from different sources, yeah? And so, for instance, the Alegrias that I will dance, that will be the second piece that I will dance. If you knew, for instance, jotas, which come from the northern part of Spain, right? And they have nothing, they're very Celtic, right? Beep, boom, ba, 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 boom, ba. That is in flamenco, but it comes from the jotas, right, from the north. So there is this interconnection, right? And I think this is a wonderful example of a little idea that we should all be aware of. And that idea is that we're all interconnected, right? If we honor one thing, we have to honor everything that is related to that. And understand that nothing comes out of in isolation, right? We are all related to everything, yeah? So, there you go. Oh God. Okay, so the instruments, I already talked about the drum, the guitar, which actually is obviously today identified with flamenco, but in reality, the first thing, flamenco originally didn't have guitar, right? Originally, flamenco was just singing and clapping. And then also, the sound of the hammer over the, I always have a problem with this word, anvil, in the iron chops, right? And in the third piece that I'm going to dance today, you're going to hear that, right? Just that sound of the hammer. The castanets have an interesting history, right? Because nowadays, they're making a comeback in flamenco, but something I'll talk in a moment. There was a rejection by flamencos of the use of the castanets after Franco. And I'll tell you in a second why. But this instrument comes from the crotalos, right, that used to be played by Muslim women, right? For those of you who have never danced flamenco, I wanted to show you something interesting about the shoes, the flamenco shoes. Extremely, extremely uncomfortable. Because uncomfortable, yes. In fact, I have to tell you that I've been practicing so much this week that I have a bruised big toe. So I'm in pain, but that's part of the game. Because this toe box here is a very, very hard toe box because obviously we have to use it to tap, right? So it's very hard on your toes. And we have nails. On the sole is a little bit thick, thankfully. And then we have nails, individual nails here and individual nails on the heel, and the heel is made out of wood, right? Can be covered in, most flamenco shoes are covered, right? They have the heel covered. I like them uncovered, but they have individual nails. So it's different from a tap dance shoes. Right? I have to tell you, now that I mentioned this, that this is a wonderful stage, except for the nails. Because rather than making the sound that I would like to make, it makes this. So, just for you to know. That's not how it's supposed to. Okay, I need to move. So, again, I told you I'm doing what I'm not supposed to do, right? Writing a lot of words here. But one important thing that I wanted to mention is that flamenco is an oral tradition, right? So it's not like you can open a book like Chopin, right? Anyone can play Chopin, no matter where. I mean, if you know how to play piano, right? But you can read the piece, right? No matter whether you speak whatever language, right? You cannot do that with flamenco. Flamenco is not written, right? So it's passed from generations and generations. It's an oral tradition, and that's part of the beauty of it, right? So whatever, and the same with the choreographies. Every choreography you will see, and you see in flamenco, today, except for the first one, and I'll talk about that in a second, is my creation, right? But that doesn't mean I invented the steps. Some of them I do. But most of them are in my body, right? In my mind, because I've taken classes with, I can't count how many teachers, right? Since 5 until now. I still take classes every week. Yeah? Because that's something you never stop learning. And you are never good at it. Right? I always say I'm a beginner and I'm not bluffing. But this is, one of my missions, right, with doing these talks is helping you enjoy what you watch in a different way, right? So because now you know what's behind, and you understand that behind any step, if I do this, that has centuries. There's centuries right there, right? If I move my hand, that's centuries, right? Of blending of cultures, of transmission, of respect for the elderly, right? Of respect for these incredible old teachers, right, that are just amazing and they can barely move, right? So it's a very different understanding of what you are seeing. And I invite you to do that with everything you do, right? Try to find out what's behind. What's behind that jazz player? What's behind that hip-hop dancer, right? Not in that person, but in that tradition. Because that gives you an understanding of the world again that enriches you and the world, right? So, again, there are many things I obviously won't get to talk about because I'm sure you're dying to get up. The history of understanding flamenco is a very convoluted, complicated one, right? And there is this idea, and Federico García Lorca, right? Everybody knows, right, from the Generación del 27, right? The Spanish great poet, and who was really supportive and very important in getting the world to know about flamenco and getting Spain to respect flamenco and to respect the gypsies, right? And in fact, he has a Romancero Gitano, so a book of poetry dedicated to singing, right, or it's a poetry of or for or about gypsies and the gypsies communities in Granada. So, but he is responsible for this teoría del duende, theory of the duende. And if you have ever heard about flamenco, you might have heard about the word duende as this very mysterious spirit. And I'm giving you here the definition that García Lorca gave of this teoría del duende, where he says whatever has black sound has duende, right? Has this mystery that comes from your guts, right? And when you sing, you're singing, with this duende, right? And Gitanos talk about duende, right? And they feel this duende, right? It's like inhabiting the spirits, right? That is before you and that really enriches what you do. Yet, right, these can also be used to exoticize right, to do this type of Orientalism, right, when understanding or when trying to place these traditions as the other, right? See, the othering of the Gypsies tradition. And so it's a very complex theme. Again, the history of flamenco is very complicated. I want to point out to you that so there is what's called the Hermetic period, of which we know nothing. Then the primitive period, where we already have some names, some words, some songs that have been collected. Then there is the golden age of flamenco, with the café cantantes, the musical cafés, right? That were cafés created mostly for the male gaze, right? Where you have, these beautiful dancers and the Spanish monarchs trying to control morally what goes in there. And then finally, and it was fairly opposed, and I'll talk about that in a moment, and I swear this will be the last thing I talk about. Then there is flamenco makes it to the theaters in the 1920s in the so-called flamenco operas. And then, believe it or not, dear Franco, the dictator of Spain, fascist, tried to co-opt flamenco and use it. No, wait. What did I do? So here you have on the left an image of the Silverio Café Cantante from 1821, right? And you can see the señoritos, right? The military men and the beautiful señoritas, right? And being, and there's a big difference from today's tablaos, right? And the tablaos are developed particularly in the 1950s, the 1960s, and in part, they developed contradictorily. In the 1950s, Franco decided to clean the image in the world, right, of this very fascist, ruthless dictator, and to try that they needed tourists, so they to try to attract tourists. And Franco tried to use a kind of a clean version of flamenco to lure tourists back into Spain. And so there is a splendor of tablaos, particularly in the 1960s, which is very interesting. That doesn't mean the dancers were supporters of Franco, but it was part of an effort, right? So I don't have much time to talk about this, but it's interesting how any art form can be co-opted, right, with ideological and political means. For instance, as you know, 1898, Spain loses all the remaining colonies, right, they had. So Spain went from being this superpower, imperial power in the world, to actually becoming fairly poor within European standards, right? And many people couldn't accept that suddenly Spain was a no one, right? In the sense of it had lost this incredible imperial power. And they start blaming people, right, for that. And who is an easy target to blame? The Gypsies, right? And flamenco, right? So what's interesting, though, is that many progressive intellectuals, the so-called Generación del 98, generation of 98, actually blame, so they created this anti-flamenquismo. So there was an anti-flamenco movement that brought together, they were not together, but all of them opposed the culture of flamenquismo, the church, the right-wing politicians, and the left-wing intellectuals, and the working movement, right? So there was this idea of blaming, right, the flamenco anti-moral, amoral, drinking culture, particularly the public, right? They wanted people to go either to church on Sundays or to do activism, right? Or to stop, right? Pleasing the señoritos of the middle class, or for whatever reasons, right? Flamenco was blamed, and there is an anti-flamenco movement with names, that are important names even among the intellectuals of the so-called 98 generation. And then, of course, this changes a lot thanks to the work of Garcia Lorca. So I have here some questions, right, that are questions that are always. Questions that I will leave you with, right? And this is the end of my talk today. So how did flamenco become a symbol of the Spanish nation? Those are things that need to be discussed, right? And that are still part of what needs to be researched, right? What is the role of foreigners and travel narratives in the development of flamenco, which was extremely important? Why was, again, flamenco used from the left and the right as a scapegoat for the failures of the Spanish Empire? How did it become controlled from the outside by ideologies that had nothing to do with flamenco, in particular by Franco, who couldn't dance? I don't think Franco could dance. Right? It's like Fidel, he couldn't dance. Anyway, but that's a different story. In fact, the deep songs, flamenco deep songs, right, that talk so much about death, right, was very fitting to Franco's reverings of the cult of death, right? So it's just an interesting thing, right? So that needs to be more researched. And then there is this interesting question, right? Since flamenco has financially survived over centuries, not now, over centuries, thanks to tourism and the development of flamenquismo all over the world, for instance, there are more flamenco academies in Japan than in all of Spain. Just go figure, right? You go to any academy of dance in Spain, and I can assure you that 50% of the students are from Japan. Right? So, can we still associate flamenco with the Romani minority? Right? Or has this now transcended or become this transnational phenomena? And again, my battle horse, is always to assert, right, the connection with the Gypsy, the Romani community. But yet, then there is this other question. Is this gypsy lore performative, right? Are we using that performing gypsy, right, as part of becoming flamenco? So, I have many more things to talk about, but I will not. And one thing I wanted to mention, all of these are links to beautiful flamenco, but one thing I want to mention is in a very recent development, flamenco comes from, and this is my bibliography, flamenco comes from a fairly, again, the original gypsy communities are very, patriarchal and with very well-defined, very strictly defined gender roles. And nowadays, thankfully, right, many dancers and many singers are trying to stretch the limits and break those gender roles. So in the same way that Carmen Amaya, right, in the 1940s and 50s, decided to dance with pants, right? Nowadays, there are amazing male dancers dancing with bata de cola, and that's a bata de cola, right? If you ever get a chance right now, in fact, next week I think is Manuel Lignan, a show in New York called Viva. It's an amazing show. And they're all dancing with this bata de cola, all men dancing with bata de colas, and they're amazing, amazing. If you ever get to see Manuel Lignan dancing, and his company is incredible. So there is a lot of experimentation, right? And a lot of trying to stretch and a lot of, developing flamenco as it should. Okay, well, thank you so much. And if you have any questions, I can entertain them now. You just want me to dance, huh? What about you dance a little? Do you want to move? Get up and move a little bit? No? Okay, well, get up. Give me 10 minutes. I need to change. I won't dance like this. And I'll see you you have an intermission now. You can go. Just don't go. Just go outside. Thank you. So are you me? Our first piece today is going to be the Sevillanas, which is the only dance you thought I was not going to talk more, huh? The only dance in flamenco, in the flamenco group of rhythms, that is dance that can be danced with a partner and that has a fairly established set of steps, right? That's why, kids learn it, and they dance, little kids with the grandmas, and this is what they would, but if you go to a fair in Spain, this is where you will see people dance. And I had the good fortune today of having 4 of my students who are going to come to the stage and dance with me. So, welcome Carol, Peppa, Lori, and Michelle. Behind, yeah, they're smiling behind the mask, correct? They should. Okay, we're ready.
Mi novio es cartujano, mi arma pintó de losa. Pintó de losa, mi novio es cartujano. Rosa de pitimini, 4 o 5 en un ramito. 4 o 5 en un ramito, rosa de pitimini. Ole, 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 ole. Rosa de pitimini, 4 o 5 en un ramito. 4 o 5 en un ramito, se ole, ole, que me parece. ¿Qué me parece? Tiene una cinturita, ole, moreno y ole. Tiene una cinturita que ole, ole, que me parece. ¿Qué me parece? Al clave la maceta, ole, moreno y ole. Al clave la maceta que ole, ole, cuando se mece. ¿Quién fuera viento para estarte meciendo? Ole, ¿quién fuera viento para estarte meciendo? Que ole, ole, en cada momento. ¡Ale! Lo tira al pozo, mi arma lo tira al pozo. Lo tira al pozo, el clavel que me diste, ole, moreno y ole. El clavel que me diste, mi alma lo tira al pozo. Lo tira al pozo, yo no quiero claveles, ole, moreno y ole. Yo no quiero claveles, mi alma de ningún mozo. Ay, que me pesa el rato que lo tuve, ole, ay, que me pesa el rato que lo tuve, mi alma de la cabeza.
Ale. So Sevillanas are divided in coplas, in cuatro coplas, 4 coplas. So it has 4 parts, right? Most grandmas with the little kids just dance the first one. And they repeat and repeat and repeat. And they have a lot of fun in the fairs doing that. So now I'm going to dance Alegrias. And I'm sure you learned that whole body of complicated rhythms, right? And it was right down here. And Alegrias comes from Cádiz originally. And it's part of a body connected to originally something called cantinas, or little singings. And Alegrias means joy. One thing I didn't mention is that part of all of these different rhythms, they have different, they allow for the expression of different emotions. So one of the things that Franco did was try to expose the tourists to the happy flower, in the mouth idea, right? Flamenco being this joyful thing. And there are rhythms like the Sevillanas, like part of the Alegrias we're going to see, that are very joyful. They're playful, right? And that's okay. Then I'll talk about the non-playful part later, right? So Alegrias come from Cádiz, and you might notice that it has a very specific structure, right? So there's an introduction, then the singer sings a letra. Normally I will have live music, but there's something called pandemia. Did I mention that? So there is a singer that sings, a letra, right? And normally the dancers listen and move to the letras. And then there are footwork sections. Then there is usually in the Alegrias, what typifies Alegrias as opposed to other rhythms related to the cantinas is that it has a silencio, a silence, right? And that means it's a moment when the guitar, right, plays this very lyrical, mournful melody, right, that changes. Obviously, it's not always the same. But just be aware of these different sections, right, because that's part of understanding the structure of the cante. Okay, I'll be right back. You can go ahead.
trau, tiriti tran 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 trau, tiriti tran 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 trau, tiriti tran tran trau, tiriti tran 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 tran, ay ay tiriti tran 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 trau, tiriti tran 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 tran, ay tiriti tran 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 trau. Tierra de los liberales, que hay ancladita en el mar. Hay tierra de los liberales, hay alcance, supiste dar, hay gracia yo, unos raudales. Hay alcance, supiste dar, hay gracia yo, unos raudales. Cuando salgo me cae, ay me llevo sao, pa' donde no hay, yo regalao prima, yo regalao. Cuando salgo me cae, me llevo sao. Tunante, ay, qué picarillo truao. Cuando te vengas conmigo, ay, ya donde te había llevado, ya donde te había llevado, ya donde te había llevado, y a darte unos paseitos, ay, por la muralla real. canta y se baila, caray, con mucha gracia y salero. Allá se toma pa' que te la comas, te traigo así una partida, mi niña. Es que la verde gitano de Cádiz, es que se toma que del barrio un la viña. Tiritita tran tran tran, tiritita tran tran tran, tiritita tran tran, ay tiritita tran tran, tiritita tran tran tran, tiritita tran tran tran, tiritita tran tran, ay tiritita tran tran tran.
Which are falling apart, but that's part of the lore. If there is no peineta that flies, it's not flamenco. Okay, just a second. So, now, I am going to dance. Seguirillas por matinete. And remember we talked about the hammer on the anvil, in the iron chops. And there's a debate about what's the first rhythm that appeared in flamenco. But I want to think that this is the one. Because many of the gypsies worked around the cities, in the outskirts of the cities, in the iron shops. It was the dirty job, right, of making the iron shoes for the horses, the beautiful iron windows that you see all over Andalusia. And so, originally, apparently, was just that sound of the beat with the singing, and the singings are lament. Now, this is un seguirilla por martinete, so it starts as a seguirilla and it becomes a martinete. The lyrics of all the seguirillas por martinete are just like harakiri, right? They're all about the hardships of life. And to tell you the truth, the majority of the most important, what we call cante hondo, the deep singing in Andalusia, is about that. It's not about, right? It's about being discriminated against. It's about fighting the militia. It's about poverty. So this particular song that I'm going to dance for you is the lament of a father for his child that is sleeping, and he doesn't know if the child is going to wake up because the child, we don't know, might be sick, might be very hungry, has not enough to eat, right? So, therefore, when we dance, if you're going to dance, do something like this, you interpret that, which means you have to feel that, right? Otherwise, you're not really dancing to the duende, or dancing to the essence of flamenco, or dancing to the spirit, right? Okay. Questions? There you go.
Se extraña y ay, Deus, mi corazón.
esto que yo por ti estoy haciendo yo es para darte más gusto y es cerca que tengo ahí.
which is not in flamenco.